What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023. Now keep in mind, both phones in this video are 4G phones, and while there is a Samsung Galaxy A14 5G and a Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, those are completely separate phones, and these phones again are the 4G versions. Now as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio as well. Now on one hand, the Moto G Stylus doesn't have a bad display. It looks decent for what it is, and at 6.5 inches, it has at least a decent size. That being said though, the Samsung Galaxy A14 has a better display in pretty much every way. At 6.6 inches versus 6.5, the size difference is definitely not insane or anything, but the A14 is a bit larger, so if you do prefer a larger display, then this is definitely something to keep in mind. Although as you can probably tell, the A14 is a bit more bulky, the bezels are a bit thicker, and in general, despite technically having the smaller display between the two, the Moto G Stylus 2023 feels a lot more sleek and modern, so definitely another thing worth considering. But with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're also getting significantly better image quality with the 1080p resolution versus, again, only 720p with the Moto G Stylus, so the A14 is going to have a much sharper and nicer looking image. So in general, if you're consuming a lot of content, I would definitely go with the A14, but for more occasional use or if you want a slightly more compact device, the Moto G Stylus will still be a decent choice. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, with this version at least, we are getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting 64GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now, keep in mind, if you're in the US considering getting one of these phones through a US carrier, I don't know that the A14 has actually reached the US yet. I know the 5G has, but I haven't seen this phone offered through US carriers quite yet, but I know it's just a matter of time. But keep in mind, with the US version, I'm like 99% sure it's not going to have 128GB, especially considering the A14 5G only has 64. I mean, they're not going to give the 4G version more storage than the 5G, so I'm going to assume the A14 is going to be getting 64. Worst case scenario, it might get 32, but at this point in 2023, I feel like that's probably not going to happen. But again, as you can clearly see, this phone in my hand does actually have 128GB, so if you do want to get the global version of this phone, you can get this much storage, whereas with the Moto G Stylus, we are only getting 64. And honestly, I feel like this is really too bad because the Moto G Stylus 2022 actually had 128, so definitely a bit of a downgrade there. But regardless, I feel like for the average user, 64GB is at least okay. So as long as you're not constantly downloading a bunch of new apps and games and stuff like that, and you're really just using your phone for more basic activities and then maybe taking photos and videos and stuff, which you can easily offload to a microSD card anyway, you should be perfectly fine. Now for security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys, so definitely a great spot for a fingerprint scanner. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy A14, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Stylus. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. No issues at all. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now, taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, up front, we get a water drop notch design for the selfie camera. Not the best looking, but considering most lower end Samsung phones have pretty much the same design, nothing out of the ordinary. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. Kinda interesting to note this phone actually does have an ultra-wide camera because for some reason the A14 5G doesn't, so not really something we haven't seen before. The same thing happened with the A13 last year. But regardless, I am glad to see at least this phone does have an ultra-wide camera. With the Moto G Stylus, up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the front-facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So unfortunately, this phone doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, which is yet another downgrade from the 2022 version, which not only had an ultra-wide camera, but the ultra-wide camera and the macro camera were actually combined, which I thought was pretty cool. But again, unfortunately with this phone, we're not getting an ultra-wide camera, so if you do want that feature, the A14 will have an advantage. Now to give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A14. Overall, definitely great quality. Sure, when compared to a much higher end device, it's not going to be nearly that level, so if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, keep in mind if you want a similar kind of quality, you are going to have to spend a bit more and get something higher end than this. But honestly, in general, for what it is, for being a really entry-level, affordable device, I do think the photo quality is pretty good, and really this goes to show that for the average user, for more casual, daily use, if you want to maybe use Snapchat, send photos to friends and family, and maybe get the occasional nice Instagram photo every now and then, you don't need to go spend $1,000 on a flagship phone. You can really just get a sub $200 phone like the Samsung Galaxy A14, and it will get the job done just fine. And then here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Stylus 2023. Same kind of thing, I do think for what it is, this phone can take some pretty good photos. So definitely if you're looking for a more affordable phone for more basic activities, but you still want a decently nice camera, either phone here will be a great choice. But again, keep in mind, the main difference between the two when it comes to the camera is that with the Samsung Galaxy A14, again, we are getting an ultra-wide camera, whereas unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 2023 does not have an ultra-wide camera. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G80 processor. Now, keep in mind, again, this phone in my hand is the global version, so there is a chance the US version might be different, but in general, I do expect the overall performance to be pretty much the same. Now with the Moto G Stylus 2023, this phone is also getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G85 processor. Now when it comes to overall performance, on one hand, neither phone is particularly fast, especially when compared to the countless 5G phones around there going for around the same price. But at the same time, for more basic daily use, stuff like light web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some really light mobile gaming, for that kind of use, they will at least get the job done. But between the two, the Moto G Stylus is significantly faster. Now, to be fair, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, compared to its predecessor, the A13 4G, it actually is a pretty big improvement because the A13 4G was honestly a pretty slow phone. But at the same time, again, the Stylus is just significantly faster, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, with this phone, you will get a nicer, smoother experience. Now, I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see here, between the two, the Moto G Stylus has a significant advantage. So again, if you want the faster phone here, definitely keep this in mind. But in my experience, the A14 is not terrible. Sure, on one hand, if you're going to be on your phone a bit, you will notice it's really not the fastest phone, but at the same time, for more basic activities, which is really what this phone is meant for anyway, it will at least get the job done. Now for the batteries, these phones are actually pretty much the same, both having 5000 mAh batteries that support 15W fast charging, so definitely great batteries here. With a 5000 mAh battery, you can definitely expect to get great battery life and longevity, so overall, if the battery is a more important thing for you, then either phone here will be a great choice. And with 15W fast charging, the charging speed with these phones is definitely good too. For the software, both phones do have Android 13, so definitely great there. And keep in mind with the Samsung, you can expect to get 4 other major updates, so this phone is going to be getting Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. Whereas with the Moto G Stylus, considering the Moto G Stylus 2022 came with Android 11 and recently updated to Android 12, I'm assuming this phone is at least going to get Android 14. Motorola's software support has definitely been getting better lately. But at the same time, if you really want the best software support between the two, which is really only going to matter if you want to keep your phone for maybe more than a year or two, then in that case, I would go with the Samsung Galaxy A14. Samsung really has among the best software support as far as Android goes. But if your main concern is really just getting Android 13 at this point, maybe you're not really planning on keeping your phone for that long beyond that anyway, then in that case, either phone will be perfectly fine. As far as other features go, unfortunately, neither phone here has NFC. Now, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, this might be different based on your region. I don't know off the top of my head what the US model is going to have, but I know with the A13 4G, there were some phones like, unfortunately, the one I have, that don't have NFC, and then some did, so if you do want to use tap and pay, then just check before you get the phone, because I'm sure there is going to be a version of the A14 4G that does have NFC. I don't know why Samsung does it like that, but again, for the purpose of this comparison, this phone in my hand does not have NFC. But with the Moto G Stylus 2023, as the name suggests, this phone of course does have a stylus, and I will say, it is actually pretty usable. Now, of course, if you're planning on doing any actual art or anything like serious drawing, it's not going to be good enough for that. I mean, compared to something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, obviously, it's nowhere near that level, but for basic handwritten notes, navigating through your display and stuff like that, it does get the job done. And compared to the Moto G Stylus 2022 and maybe a phone like the TCL Stylus 5G, other things like that, it is actually pretty responsive, and for what it is, I am impressed. But in conclusion, Which of these phones is better? I feel like for all intents and purposes, there's not really an insane difference between the two. That being said though, each phone does have a couple advantages. On one hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, this phone again does have much better software support, because even though Motorola's software support is definitely getting better, most of their better updates are going to be reserved for their 5G phones and higher end devices. Whereas with the Samsung Galaxy A14 and really any Samsung phone, pretty much all of them are going to be getting at least 4 major updates. So if you do want to keep your phone for a longer amount of time, definitely something worth considering. And in addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A14 definitely has a better display, being a little bit larger and also having that 1080p resolution, giving you much better image quality. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, consuming a lot of content, especially stuff like watching videos where the image quality is a bit more important, the A14 will be a better choice. This phone does also have an ultra-wide camera, whereas again, unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 2023 doesn't. So definitely keep that in mind too. And again, this phone in my hand does have 128GB of internal storage, which is quite an advantage, but I don't really want to count that just because I almost know that the US version of this phone is not going to have this much storage. So just keep in mind, if you do want to get a 128GB version of this phone, you can, but I feel like even then, for the unlocked price, there are better options out there anyway. But on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus, this phone is significantly faster, so even though the A14 has a better display, really if you're going to be using your phone a lot more, it might be worth it to get something that's a bit faster. And then of course this phone does have a stylus, which is definitely not a really common feature. So of course if you do want a stylus, then between the two, the Moto G Stylus is definitely going to be the obvious choice here. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 4G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 4G 2023. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.